Thank you all for having me here. Thanks. I just seriously have never seen such a rock star group of women, so can you just give yourself a round of applause, please? I'm just hoping a future president is in the house, because we need that. So thank you for having me, future president. So just really quickly about me. Make sure. So I co-founded and I'm the co-CEO of something called Werk, and it's a marketplace of flexible work opportunities for ambitious women. So our premise is that women are falling out of the leadership pipeline, not because they need to lean in more, they need mentors, they need sponsors. You all are so strong. We believe that those services are important, but the real reason women are leaving is around the time they have kids. And for my partner and I, that was part of our story, is once we had children, it became impossible to work 16 hours a day. Frankly, I don't think anybody wants to work 16 hours a day anymore. And so for what we do is we pre-negotiate flexibility with companies, and we offer it to a curated member base. Our women have to apply to be part of our platform. You have to be legit, you have to be experienced, you to get access to amazing jobs. We just filled the VP of Finance role at Buffer, which is a social media aggregation platform, fully remote job. I mean, this is a dream job for a woman and CFO track. So that's our whole thing. We actually just closed a funding round. We have 5 VCs on board, so it's been thrilling to build this. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here to talk to you all about imposter syndrome. So quickly before we get started, raise your hand if you've ever felt like you're in the wrong room, or you don't belong, or you don't know what you're talking about. Okay, so like everyone. Good, because I feel the same way all the time. And so I need to inject a little bit of humor. Like every single person that's smart and talented feels the exact same way. So you're not alone, and it's something we're going to talk a little bit more about today. But what is it really? So there's actually 2 different interesting syndromes. One is called, I'm totally going to mispronounce it, the Dunning-Kruger Effect. And that's people who are actually not that good and think they're really awesome. And then there's imposter syndrome, when you're really, really awesome and you think you're not that good. There's also a gender component to this, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Men tend to be over there, women tend to be over here, and that just happens all the time. And so I think I'll inject a little bit more about gender bias and things like that in the talk, but it particularly happens to women, and women particularly suffer from imposter syndrome. So seriously, what is it? It means you feel like a fraud. It feels like you don't belong. You feel like any day you're going to be found out and somebody's going to find out that you're not actually here for real. It more often than not happens to women. It more often than not happens to really talented people. And some of the evidence shows that the more talented you are, the more likely you are to feel like a fraud, which is kind of absurd because you should actually feel really good about yourself if you're really talented. So I'll tell you my own story. And I really, at the end, want to get more quickly to Q&A. Like, this will actually be pretty short. I really want to hear from you, and I want this to be interactive. But my own story is I actually moved to the US as a refugee from the former Soviet Union when I was 6 years old. I actually was 5 when I left. I turned 6 on the way. For any Soviet Jewish immigrant, they went through Austria and Italy at the time, and I turned 6 in Italy. My birthday cake was a quarter of a watermelon that my parents bought me with my candles in it. And so, talk about imposter syndrome. I moved to a country where, by default, I didn't really feel like I belonged at first. And I learned English really quickly. Within a year, I was fluent. But I was the kid who had the sad little immigrant clothes. I was the kid that didn't have an American Girl doll. I was the kid that didn't have a backyard pool party for their birthday. And so this has been a big part of kind of what shaped me. And if it's not clear yet, I've felt like an imposter a lot. And I'll talk more about that as well. And part of that for me was driven by being an immigrant and always feeling like friends came over and I had my weird little Russian food to offer them, and nobody wanted herring on toast. Surprise, surprise. So frankly, sometimes the more you achieve, the more you feel like a fraud. So I went to a great university undergrad. I got a great job straight out. I've had, this is actually the 3rd iteration of my career as being an entrepreneur. But yet I always felt like a fraud. So a couple funny stories, just so you know this is not lip service, this is real. So I worked at McKinsey & Company straight out of undergrad, which is a big consulting firm. Brandeis is still a small liberal arts university. No one recruits on campus. Actually, who's heard of Brandeis? Okay, I'm super impressed. That's awesome. I remember interviewing people you go, where? it? Like, what is it? So I was already really nervous, and I had it in my head that I wanted to do consulting. So I was the crazy person that went to the vault and downloaded the list of the top 50 consulting firms. I had no idea what they did, but I applied to all of them because I was like, one of them is going to take me, right? And I still remember, obviously my dream were like the big 3 firms, and I remember calling them, like sending in my application, and they're like, well, you didn't go to a core school, so we'll call you after we get done with our core schools. So like talk about feeling like constantly like you don't belong. McKinsey actually called me back. I actually had an interview. I actually got the job. I still remember showing up my first day of training, which was in New York, and it was like at a nice hotel. I guess I'd been to New York with my parents, but not on this sort of level. And feeling every day like somebody was gonna tell me I was in the wrong place. And just like every morning waking up like anxious and like if I actually slept at all. And worrying that this was like totally the wrong place for me and I didn't belong. And I still remember, they told us at training, we had a week of training, that the first meeting we'll have will be, there's a professional development manager and they help staff you on your first project. And I knew that. And I got an email at my desk, I'm sitting at my desk like waiting for my project, and this email comes in and said, Anna, could you go speak to the PD manager? And my heart is like coming out of my chest. I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna be fired? They gave the wrong offer to the wrong person. Like, oh my God, like what am I gonna tell my parents? Like, where am I gonna find a job? Everybody already has a job. Like, what am I gonna do? They just wanted to staff me on a project. So like, it's okay. It was okay. It all turned out fine. But the point is like, you achieve great things and yet you still feel like any day somebody's gonna find out that you don't belong there. Same thing happened, frankly, at Harvard Business School. So I applied to 3 business schools. I got into 2 of them. Was really thrilled to get into HBS. I mean, that was like my gold pinnacle. I still remember I went on the campus tour with my parents, and we show up, it's like the summer, and my parents are so proud, right? Any immigrant kid's parents want them to go to Harvard. This is like the dream. So we show up to campus, like there's no one there, and there's just like this little bunny frolicking over the lawn. And my parents are like, what is this place? Like, what is this magical place you found? So anyway, I got into HBS, I'm there, and it's interesting, so participation there is like, you raise your hand, you participate in class. That's half your grade. So half your grade is pretty much the final, half is participation. I don't mind speaking out, I'm obviously standing here talking to all of you, but I was so nervous. And I was so nervous that I didn't go to an Ivy League undergrad. I was so nervous that I had to say something, that I raised my hand every single time. So like this was me my first year. Like I just sat like this the whole time, hoping somebody would call on me. To the point where I actually got the Statue of Liberty Award, which is this, because I was so nervous about fitting in that I just kept trying to talk out. And so honestly, that kind of hurt me. And the point was I should have just embraced the fact that I'm there and celebrated and been proud of that. But it keeps happening, and I was just sharing with Gabby like this funny story that came up, and particularly since I'm speaking to a room full of women. Sometimes the reason you feel imposter syndrome is because of the gender bias dynamics. I'm gonna take a little right turn to gender bias for a sec. The last 3 years was actually living in Vegas. So I went to Harvard Business School, worked at the Bridgespan Group for 3 years after that doing nonprofit consulting. And I was pregnant at the time, and my husband got a job offer in Vegas, which is super weird. But it was a really cool job. And so I was like, you take it, I'll figure out what I'm going to do. Like, we'll sort it out, like, not a problem. So we moved to Vegas, and I actually found a small philanthropy advising firm. And it was struggling. Ended up being the most incredible experience. I took over the firm as COO. I turned it around. Like I actually launched my first tech product there, which is where I got the entrepreneurial bug. But I still remember my son started preschool there. And so we're at a birthday party at some like place-based, children are running around like madmen. And this guy's talking to me and he's like, oh, come meet my friend. I don't even remember their names. He's like, he's applying to business school. You should, give him some advice since he went to HBS. I was like, okay, great, whatever. This guy comes over and he's like, oh, great, so what years did your husband go to HBS? I was like, no, just me. And my husband's standing behind me going, because he like loves this. He like cracks me. He didn't go to business school. I'm the one who went to business school. And he is like the biggest feminist, and this like always cracks him up. So this guy's like, no, but like, so you guys went together? I was like, no, just me. I'm the only one that went. He's like, he just pauses. And he like really doesn't know what to say. He's like, so you both went to business school. I was like, oh. Next topic. So the problem is, I think sometimes, because women in particular, we are much more likely to feel insecure. We're much more likely to be introspective and analytical. And we're much more likely to experience gender bias. So women are much more likely to experience imposter syndrome. So like number one, like you're not alone, and like we all feel it. And it doesn't help when other people question our abilities and like, put us against a different standard than men. All right, enough about me. So what changed? So for me, this is kind of a crazy slide, but we're going to go with it. So for me, what changed was just time and getting a lot of perspective on what was happening and understanding that eventually I began to accept that my accomplishments actually had maybe a tiny bit to do with my own effort and not just like luck and circumstance. It also was finding something that I love. And I think for me, like once I found the place that was like my jam, I felt this a lot less. And even, like public speaking was not my jam for a long time. It's not my jam, and I don't get up here and I'm like, I'm still a little terrified, but I'm not as terrified as I was before. And it was just really thinking about what was important to me. And the other big factor was, frankly, having a child, which I don't recommend as a solution to imposter syndrome because there's probably better solutions. But for me, it was actually stepping outside of myself. And I think sometimes imposter syndrome comes from like kind of obsessing with our own selves and being so worried and just like overanalyzing everything we do. And for me, having a kid like just forced me to just like take a huge perspective back. I still remember when I was at McKinsey and I was at Bridgespan, if we had a big presentation, I just couldn't sleep the night before because I was so worried I would say the wrong thing, I'd be found out. Like honestly, that went away after having a kid because I was just so tired that I just slept whenever somebody let me sleep. But a lot of it really was just perspective and time. But there are actually some proven tips and tricks to deal with imposter syndrome, so I'm going to talk about those. Great. Number one is just knowing about it, right? We talked about this. How many of you had heard of imposter syndrome before this? How many of you understood what it really was? Exactly. So now you know what it is, and you can be aware when it's happening to you and kind of be like, okay, wait a minute. I actually belong here. I know what's happening. Like, I know my own abilities, and accept that this is just a thing that happens. Embrace positive feedback and like celebrate when you actually do a good job. Like take a moment and be like, give yourself a pat on the back and like, I did a great. And this is a personal thing, but also a team thing. In my last job when I ran the philanthropy firm, something good happened and we would just move on to the next project. And I was the one who encouraged us to institute, all right, let's pause. Like, let's celebrate something good just happened. Like, we did this something good, and like, let's embrace that before we start running on all cylinders and going on to the next thing. So just really take it. And when somebody gives you feedback, I don't think I'm allowed to swear in here, but it's the bad sandwich, which is like something good, something bad in the middle, and something good at the end. Like, we are just waiting to hear the something bad. I know that when somebody says, I have some feedback for you, I'm like, all right, let's have it. And if they're like, this was a really good presentation, I'm like, but, what's the next part? So just actually listen to the positive, because there's something there. And one of my favorite things was a talk when I was at business school. One of the professors talked about the importance of being spiky. And what that means is, when you get feedback, they try to even out spikes. You're really good at this, and you're really bad at that. But the most amazing people are actually really spiky people. They're not flatline people. They really embrace what they're really good at, and they compensate for what they're not as good at. So just listen to what those big spikes are, because that's what's going to make you an amazing leader and an amazing person. Differentiate your feelings from the facts, and this really relates to one, which is just think about what actually happened. So you do really well on a test, you get the job that you always wanted. I think a quick reaction was like, oh, I just got lucky. But look at the facts. Like, if the acceptance rate to a program is like 8% and you got in, it's probably not luck. You probably worked really hard at it, and you probably deserved it, and you're probably just feeling insecure. But just definitely do that. And then even people who are not frauds, even the biggest experts, make mistakes all the time. If you make a mistake, or if you feel like, oh, this is it, like this is the end of everything, you're not the only one that's made a mistake before. Everybody always makes mistakes. They recover from it. I truly believe that the mistake doesn't make the person, the recovery does. And so that's the most important thing, is being able to like bounce back and be resilient. And we were talking before with Emily actually about early childhood education, and I'm obsessed with the idea that resilience and the sort of social and emotional learning is the most important thing for kids. It's also the most important thing for adults. So being resilient and being able to bounce back from things, recover, and move on is incredibly important. There's a great book I read that's called The War of Art. I really, really love it. And they had a great, yes, good. So I will just say, I started reading this book and there's like 3 words on every page, and I'm hyper efficient, and I'm like, what is this book? Like, why are there only 3 words in every page? Like, this is gonna make me insane. But I got through it. But there's literally like 3 words on every page. And I think it's a guy who wrote it. Guy? Girl? Guy? Their whole thing is like, you ink. So when you do something, particularly if it's an entrepreneurial endeavor, artistic endeavor, and that's what this book focuses on. It's so much of your soul that goes into it. Like, it's everything about you. And so it's sometimes very hard when you face setbacks or you face failures to separate that from yourself. So you didn't fail. Me Inc. failed, but a company can recover and a company can find a different way to operate, and that's okay. And so you need to try to create this sort of like the business you and the company you, and that's different from you as a human. And just because something doesn't work out professionally, or you write a blog post and you think it's gonna go viral and like 2 people read it and it's all hate mail, doesn't mean that you as a person suck. It just means that your company needs a different strategy, and that's okay. And number 6, so remember that you're not under a microscope. There's a great and sad sort of psychological component called the spotlight effect. And the whole idea is that you always feel like you're under a spotlight. You feel like everything you're doing is being scrutinized. The reality is no one cares. No one's actually looking at you. And I don't mean that, like I'm saying it kind of facetiously, but the idea is like everything that we get so nervous about being found out of fraud, it's like, oh, I said something a little bit the wrong way, or you used the wrong word. Honestly, nobody noticed. Nobody noticed, and so just don't let that deter you, and remember that you probably put a greater spotlight on yourself than anybody else does. And finally, everybody thinks they're a fraud too. Every day I think I'm a fraud, and every day I'm like, oh my God, I'm totally gonna be found out. Like, we deal with investors all the time, and they're like, oh, this is your first go around, right? Great, thank you. But it's hard, and I still face this every day. I think what helps me, as I mentioned, is I found something that is my jam and something that I love and something I'm really passionate about. But I feel like this all the time, and I still go through all of these things, and I still think about separating myself from Me Inc. I think about the fact that nobody's really looking in detail at what I'm doing. I think about the fact that this is just my feeling and it's not the fact of my performance. So just know that this is going to keep happening, and that's okay. I think what's most important is knowing that this is a thing and how you can recover from it, and to not let it hold you back from what you want to be. And that's it. That's all I have. I'd really love to take any questions, and I'm going to do something crazy that I like to do with Q&A. Is in the feeling of imposter syndrome, you all have the answers for each other. So every question, I'm going to ask somebody in the audience in addition to me to answer it. Sounds good? Deal? Awesome. Any questions? Yeah.
I'll start it off with an easy one. What was the name of the book?
Somebody else can answer it.
Oh, The War of Art. The War of Art.
Do you remember who wrote it? Because I don't. Somebody should Google it. It is a dude.
It's a short read, too. It's not like...
Right, because there's 3 words per page. Awesome. See, somebody else already answered it. Any other questions? Oh, who is it? Yes, yes. You read it in like an hour. It's really good, actually. I'm not into self-help books, and this one's really, really good. I very much recommend it. Anything else? Yeah.
I'm interested in marketing myself. That's the area I want to do. I have a lot of background in IT. I have the alphabet in the back of my name. But what I want to do is when you talk about flexibility, I've always wanted that way. I've always been a consultant. But I've been doing it through companies. Now I want to do my own company. How do you do that? How do you get yourself?
It's a really good question. So I'm not like a solopreneur, right? I have a partner and we have a business together, so it's a little bit of different, and I'm definitely gonna ask somebody in the audience to chime in as well. But for me, honestly, it was committing, and I know that sounds like really vague, but we had this idea and we started writing a business plan. And there's a point where we had to make a decision of are we actually gonna do this or are we not? There were still so many open questions. We really were not 100% sure on what the business model was. We weren't 100% sure on what the product offering might be. But there's a point where we were we're just gonna do this. We're gonna quit our jobs and we're gonna do it. And so I think, to me, that what I've learned so far, and I don't have all the wisdom, I can share what I know, is that forced us to then deal with challenges head on. And we really were able, there's lots of setbacks that you face and lots of questions that happen, but once you've committed to doing it, you actually have the mental strength to do it yourself. I will say today, I think there's just so many opportunities to start something on your own. I mean, they say that the funding climate is a little bit more challenging. They say the business climate's a little bit more challenging. I've found that if you have a really great idea or you're offering a great service yourself, that the market is infinite. And I do think the world is getting much more friendly to women leaders. It's not perfect by any means, but I think people really are looking for strong women to take these, entrepreneurial opportunities and build them up. But I'd love if anybody else from the audience wants to chime in with any advice. Yeah.
I think that the fact that you're here, you already know that networking is a great way to expand yourself. I actually work at an IT solutions company, and you want my card?
Woo!
So I really enjoyed your talk and all these tips, imposter syndrome and self-confidence and just confidence at work, I think all goes together. Can you speak to any of your experience dealing with being, confident in what you do and, doing what's your jam, but working with others who may perceive it as being, bossy or difficult to work with or, too headstrong? Like, how do you balance being confident and knowing what you're good at and hitting those spikes without, coming off as, overly aggressive?
So I'll answer and I'll just share a little anecdote, and then I obviously would love thoughts from the rest of the room. I think just by being aware of that, my hunch is you're not bossy and you're very professional. And so the fact that you're even aware of that, I think you're going to strike the right balance. How people receive it is a different story. That's actually not your problem. Like, it's really not your problem. I think the fact that you are considering whether you're being respectful and you're being professional means you're going to be. So yesterday, we actually just closed our funding round yesterday. But yay! But we had our last investor, and he said yes. And then he was like, "Can I offer you some feedback?" And I was like, "Great, love your feedback." But he said, "You two," to my partner and I, "you're just a little too polished." And I was like, "Well." I don't have a poker face. Like, I didn't learn that in Vegas, apparently. I was like, I was like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, you guys are just too polished. Like, usually when I see a startup, like, they don't have answers to all these things. And so I don't know, and I'm not gonna like put this in the category of gender bias. Maybe they like are used to scrappier, younger startups. I was like, I'm pretty sure you didn't say that to the guy. I didn't say that out loud, but that's what I'm thinking. And so I think this is just gonna keep happening. But personally, and I can only speak for myself, I've not let that deter me. I will act as strong as I am, as proud as I am. I know what I know, and I'm gonna share that. And I'm not gonna let anybody make me talk quieter. I'm not. I think you have to be respectful and you have to be professional, but you're going to be. And so I think you should just carry your voice and speak up, because the worst thing you can do is, by being afraid to speak, not put your full potential and your full skills and your full knowledge out there. Because we all have something incredibly valuable to give to the world, and we shouldn't talk any quieter. Does anybody else have advice? Do you want to share advice or question?
I think it's really hard, but the most important thing is just to not judge a situation and just do what you're doing. And if you do that in your personal life, then it's go into business.
Yeah, and the other one quick thing is I think it's harder to say when you're younger, but you'll self-select for the right environments where you can be yourself. I think that's one of the most important things, and I think maybe that's why I still feel imposter syndrome, but I feel it less as an entrepreneur, because I found my environment. And I think it's harder to say when you just need a job, right? You need to have a job and you don't want to lose that job. But you will find the environments where you can be yourself. And the reality is, when you find the environment you can be yourself, you're going to perform better and you're going to be happier. And it's just going to be better for you all around. So I just don't do anything differently is the only thing I can take away from that.
Can I just make a comment about that? Me, I'm really front with people. And as a woman, they take it as arrogance. Where if I was a man, it would be assertiveness. How do you deal with that?
Sorry, was that out loud? I don't know. The only thing I can say is, I think we have to, number one, I think talk the way you talk. Be strong, because the flip side of it, you're not going to be heard if you're not assertive. You don't be like the blushing wallflower. I just think you need to be heard. And the second thing is, I've started calling it out. If somebody like says something that to me is gender bias, I name it and I call it out. I mean, obviously this is like very scary. Like I get it, it's like very scary. But we recently had a situation actually with an accelerator we were a part of where we received feedback. So I'll just tell the quick story. I'm just not going to name it for this moment, but basically we were in the final round. My partner and I were presenting. We do like we pitch our little hearts out, right? Like we do the best job we've ever done, and we get 10-minute presentation, 10-minute Q&A. We get to Q&A, and it's like just like weird and awkward silence. Finally, one guy starts talking. He talks for like 5 minutes, and we have 10 minutes of Q&A, and I'm just like looking at the clock, like what is going on? And he finally starts like grilling us on things and saying, well, you need to get tech firms on board. You don't have tech firms. And he keeps interrupting us, and I'm trying to answer. And I finally interrupt him, and I go, well, actually, we're talking to IBM and Microsoft. And he goes, don't be defensive. So, right, exactly. So what, I mean, it's gonna keep happening, right? And so what we did, and we kind of walked out of there being like, whoa, that was weird. And actually my partner reacted more to it than I was. I was like, oh, they just don't get it. She's like, no, that's gender bias, and we're gonna name it. This is our business, like that's it. So we actually wrote a letter back, and that judge is not invited back. And so, you know, is that a perfect solution? Did we feel like we got the fairest shake? No, but we solved that problem for somebody else in the future, and that's the best we can do is like continue to be assertive. And when you feel like it's a gender bias situation, call it out. There's so many comments, I don't know. Go ahead.
I found that it's very effective when you call something out if you let the other person how that made you feel. And even if you're super assertive and they find that to be offensive or whatever, if you say like, when you said this, you hurt my feelings, people just stop. Like,
Oh, okay.
I haven't met a person that I'm
They
like,
just blurted it
when
out.
you say that hurts my feelings, I've never had somebody be like, well, F you, or like whatever. They're like, oh, I'm sorry. Because a lot of times people don't realize that they're being jerks, because that's just the way they've behaved and nobody's ever let them know.
Right, exactly.
So I find that to be
It's a really, really good idea. And one thing we started doing, particularly we're 2 women founders with a women-focused business and focused on like the credentialed millennial mom, right? Most of the people we pitched are old white guys. So a couple times we've done and politely said, you might not understand where we're coming from, but let me explain where we're coming from. And you can do that in a really polite, kind way, just saying, I mean no offense, but let me understand kind of where I'm coming from. Let me help you understand kind of how that sounds. And just doing it in a really constructive way, actually. And the fact is, I think most normal people today are terrified enough about any sort of bias that they're like, whoa, I did not mean to do that. And sometimes it is deliberate bias. What I've seen so far, and the majority of time, is it's this sort of covert, accidental bias, but they don't even realize they're doing it. I'm not excusing it, but I'm saying a lot of times people don't even understand that they're subtly doing these things. There is those examples of egregious bias, and you should stand up to those. But for everybody else, I think you should try to educate them. We could talk about bias forever. Should we do other questions? Bias? Where are we going with this? Do you want to jump in? Yeah.
So in those moments where somebody says, I have feedback for you, or I need you to do this, and you feel like an imposter, and your heart starts racing, and you start saying, oh my God, I'm going to be found out, I'm a fraud, this is horrible. Are there things that you've now found that you can say to yourself that sort of bring things back down to normal and level yourself out so that you can like focus on the task?
Yeah, this happens all the time still, by the way. So literally like 3 months ago when we were starting to talk to professional investors, one of them asked me, he's like, can you send me your cap table? I was like, yes, what is a cap table? Should have paid attention in business school, shoot. No, seriously, I was like, what is a cap table? So what I do honestly is I need to take a step back. I still can't stop that moment of panic, and I still can't stop that little like, oh no, like what am I gonna do? But what I've taught myself is that if I walk away and I start to just chip away at the problem or chip away at what I need to do, I realize really quickly it's actually not that bad, and it's actually easier than I thought. And so what I've done is like sort of leaned into the stress a little bit and just like embrace that heart flutter, because it gives me the adrenaline to get started in the task. And I force myself to just like open something, whether I have to write a memo and I have no idea how to write this memo. I just like open it and like set it up, and like I think immediately as I start just like chipping away at it, it calms down. The reality is I think that heart flutter doesn't go away. At least for me, it hasn't. But that's okay. I think just start, and then you'll realize you actually have all the skills. And this is like the whole imposter syndrome thing. You actually have it all inside. It's like fact versus feeling. Come back to the fact that this is a feeling, put it aside, focus on the facts, and it'll help you get through that stress. don't know if there's other advice or, yeah.
I have a comment with being the alpha female thing. Good morning. Good morning. I had two situations happen. I used to be a sergeant in the military. I was
Amazing.
Army reservist.
Amazing.
I was a diesel mechanic, so yeah.
Were you like the only woman?
Yes.
Okay, that's amazing.
Thank you. Out like the day before the election. Like, thank God.
Oh my God.
I did have one situation where I had to deal with someone who I modeled a little bit, and I think he had me messed up one day. It was a situation where we had a drill, where we had to act like we were getting armed and just throw stuff on and, get out and, whatever. I'm always calm in those situations. Like, the guys are always like, oh my God, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, you know they're going to do this. Why?
Right.
It's not like they're literally in Iraq, but, long story short, I had a situation where this time I was not prepared. And I ran out and anything I could find, I had like a poncho on with sweatpants and combat boots. But I had my helmet and, the necessities that I need to have for my drill. So I come out and my huge sergeant looks at me. He was like, oh, so you picked the perfect time to be a supermodel. And I was like, first of all, I have like drool. It's 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'm not a morning person, so I had to take a moment. And I was PMSing out there. And I was like, girl, it was. So anyway, we had a moment. I literally could chew him out. Like,
Yeah.
but then I had to look at it. Sometimes you just can't take people serious. Like, if you embody someone else's negativity, you're only gonna make yourself negative. So when men are doing things like this, I literally kill them with kindness because I don't feel like it.
Yeah.
Like, I think about wrinkles. I know y'all think about skincare. Let me not say anything that hasn't happened. So I feel like my core advice to anyone is, if you see someone being away, I had to ask him later on that day, like, were you having an okay day? Like, are you okay?
Yeah.
And he realized in that moment, like, what, I was a bit of a douche. And
Yeah.
I was like, it was like an underlying eye communication.
Right.
Like, what you did was wrong. I'm not going to stoop to your level. I hope you have a better day because that had nothing to do with it.
I think it's awesome.
Then the second
I think it's awesome.
I got fired from my job Saturday for being an alpha female. Like, literally, I'm a
Oh my God.
maitre d' at a restaurant. I'm not saving lives. I didn't, like, I'm not mind the hospitality field.
Right.
Don't make it quick. I just felt like we were an up-and-coming restaurant. I was trying to help. And they literally sat me down. So condescending. It was just like, we realized that, you're a little too good for this job. So
That's crazy.
we just have to let you go.
Oh my God.
I said too good for $22 an hour. I'm perfectly fine. I'm absolutely fine. So like I said, it's just literally a thing of if you emit the proper energy, things will come back to you. So if you don't emit negativity, it's gonna find you, but it's like
Right.
all about how you deal with it.
I agree. Agreed. Couldn't agree more. And I think part of it is the world's changing so quickly right now, right? And so I think that's right. And I think there's so many different nuanced situations, and I am hopeful that the world that we'll see 5 years from now and 10 years from now, aside from our president, will be a better world where like women really can get ahead and you're not dealing with this sort of stuff. But it's changing every day, and so I think like every situation has so many nuances to it. But thank you for sharing that. Thank you. Yeah.
President of my company is a woman, and unfortunately she's kind of.
Do you want to speak up more? I want to make sure everybody hears it.
Sorry. The president of my company is a woman, and she actually calls us out when we're not wearing makeup, and tells the guys that he needs to pluck his eyebrows and stuff like that. So I can't really say that. I don't really know what you do in that type of situation when you kind of don't like gender bias. But
So honestly, one of the reasons we founded our company is moments like that. We found that the older generation of women sometimes is really hard in our generation. I'm just going to put myself with you guys for a second. We'll be same generation. But I'm going to go with it. But that's because like the Gen X women had to blaze the trail, and they had to break through all these boundaries. And so the only way they could get ahead was, frankly, by being like a dude and being mean. And so I would say in that generation of women, I find that women find it, like, this is my own personal thing. This is like not like my, representation of what every other woman my age feels like, but I found that women are either want to take you under their wing or they're gonna drag you through the coals because that's what happened to them. And it's one or the other and nothing in between. With that situation, honestly, I come back to, I'm sorry, what was your name?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Tiara. So what you said is she's probably just having a really bad day all the time. Like she just is probably a really unhappy person. No, seriously, I think those situations, you kill them with kindness. Like that's not a perfect advice. I think if something is egregious, you have to stand up to it. But that situation, you kill them with kindness because I found that a lot of those women are really unhappy women and like really like just, they're doing it to you because it happened to them. And with some women, it works to kind of hold up a mirror and be like, I just want you to know what's actually happening here. And I think when they realize that, it's actually horrible to them and horrifying that they've become the women that they hated. And sometimes like that's just their philosophy. So when I was in business school, like the craziest thing happened just similar to that was we had first year a class called leadership. I don't know, they teach you leadership at HBS. Leadership in something, I can't remember what it's called. But so the class is 1/3 women, 2/3 men, and your participation, like I said, is half your grade. And you get midterm grades in your participation, and nobody got the highest marks. And the reason we realized that is we were chatting over lunch with a couple of my friends being like, man, it's like really hard to get good participation marks. Like, did anybody get, I forget what the highest category was, but whatever it was. And we kind of looked around the table and none of us had gotten the highest category because we were just trying to figure out like, what do you do? And then we gathered the rest of the women in the class and asked and pretty quickly realized that she didn't give, the female professor, did not give any of the women the highest category of marks at all. There was 33 women in my class, like none of them. I mean, that's like really shocking to me to believe that none of them deserved it. We ended up actually asking her to have lunch with the women in our section and talking to her about that. And she literally admitted that she did it to teach us a lesson, that we are gonna need to stand up to men that are biased against us. And so we're gonna have to work twice as hard as everybody else. And we turned around and said, do you know what you just did to us? Is like you basically punished us for being women. And these are like our midterm marks. Like, not that grades really matter in business school, but like that was like pretty shocking. And so I think number one is like empathy, and number two is like when it's like egregiously bad, hold the mirror up to them if you can. But I think it just, unfortunately, I think it was so hard for the women above us, and so like that's where like the empathy comes in. It was so hard for them that they are a product of their environment, and doesn't excuse it, but that is like the reason for that behavior. I don't know if anybody else has great advice. I know.
So I am fortunate enough to work at a company where I think people are pretty aware of gender bias. However, there's one executive that we have, our chief revenue officer, who does not take women seriously. And we were in a meeting together, and it was him, myself, and another guy. And he asked me a question, and I think I maybe like mumbled the answer or something, and he didn't hear it. And he said to the guy sitting next to me, "What did she say?" And I was like, "Okay, if you want to ask me a question, like I'm happy to clarify what I said." That's my purse. So I always go between either calling somebody out or relieving myself of the burden of trying to change their opinion. Like, I cannot go through life trying to teach everybody a lesson that probably your mother should have taught you very early on. So I never know how to balance that.
So there's, and I don't have a direct answer, but there was a great example. The White House, did anybody read this? The White House is doing this thing for women for speaking up. Do you want to share it? Because I don't want to talk the whole time.
So it's
I'm gonna put you in.
when there's more than one woman in a room, if a woman has an idea, the other women will echo it or they'll like snap to it. Basically, they'll like give it props in order to amplify its effect. Because is that?
Yeah, exactly. And they'll also, like when that happens, or some guy like says it again, and they're like, that's a great idea, and you're like, I just said that. The woman would be like, that's right, that's exactly what Anna said, right? And like, basically the women have like this agreement that they'll have each other's back, because similar with like a lot of other industries, like in politics, there's a lot more men than there are women. And like, I thought this was just one really cool idea, which is basically like, I think, I love a lot of people have been doing the hashtag you can sit with us. Like, I love that philosophy as women. And I know we went like really deep on the gender bias thing right now, but part of it is like we all have to support each other, and we can't be that woman that's your boss that is so mean to other women. Like, we have to support each other. And one way of doing that is implicitly or explicitly, when other women speak up, support them, right? Be like, oh, I loved it. I mean, hopefully you're saying something good, right? Don't just like support them to support them, but, although that's good too. But more importantly, if somebody's like talking over another woman, like speak up too, right? And amplify what she's saying. I think they were calling it amplification or something like that. But I really love that idea of just, you know, making sure if that's happening to somebody else, for yourself, that's hard, right? But hopefully you have like a buddy system where somebody can actually intervene and be like, actually, that was a great idea that she actually said. Do you have time? Do you want more questions or 5 minutes? Okay, so maybe like 1 or 2 more questions or thoughts.
So I'm in a women-dominated field, but in a male-dominated industry. And what I've found a lot of times is with the imposter syndrome, what happens is myself trying to be like a man and combat that by being and behaving like a man. And you talked a lot about how everyone feels that imposter syndrome though. So I don't know if you would find any strategies to try to bring the imposter out of the other people, or
Oh, interesting.
you know what I mean? Like to admit that you are feeling this way, because I think that can work both ways. I don't know if you've tried either strategy.
So I don't think I've ever done anything like that explicitly, but what I do is think about it implicitly, is the fact that like a lot of people, particularly the ones that have the most bravado, are probably the ones that are most insecure. So I don't do anything about it explicitly, because the last thing I want to do is call it out for somebody else, like, because I just, like, that hurts me even to think about doing that. But what I do is just always remember that, particularly if somebody is like, a guy is like having a lot of bravado, it's probably because they're feeling really insecure in that moment. And the way you can actually combat it is by making them feel secure, because that's when people let their guard down a little bit more. And so like helping them actually feel more comfortable and like actually being more empathetic in yourself with them brings it out more. Because the funny thing is, I don't think we realize that sometimes we really scare people. I feel like when you're being confident and assertive, like you're probably scaring some people and they probably feel like a fraud next to you. And so one of the most important things is like, to me, has always been being really genuine and really authentic, and you know, remembering that everybody else is dealing with their own problems and their own insecurity. That's what's worked for me, but I don't know if, I'd love to hear if anybody else has advice on that. No?
I was just going to comment on that. I feel like sometimes you can be too over the top, like upfront with people and be like, yeah, you don't want to say you don't know what you're doing, but to just show that you don't fully, you know, ask questions or that kind of thing. There's a balance there. Like you don't want to show too much that you don't know what you're doing. But I feel like
Totally.
you can kind of come to a place where you can be on their level, where they then understand that they can help you, and maybe you both don't really know.
And I think the best way is honestly to ask questions, because you're not admitting anything, you're just asking questions and you're probing. I just like generally, my like philosophy is like ask questions, because first of all, it buys you some time to think, and then somebody else has to talk. But second, like you actually learn so much, and I think like we as a society and as people are like terrible listeners, just like categorically speaking. We really suck at listening to other people, because generally when people talk, we're waiting for our turn to talk, or we're thinking about when we're gonna make a comment. And so I think that like truly paused listening to somebody and like asking them a question and letting them talk completely catches people off guard. And so I really believe, like, instead of admitting like, I have no idea what I'm doing, tell me about this, be like, well, like, what did you find worked for you when you did this? Or like, tell me more about, like, I know you've worked on this before, or like, I just want to play something, like, you know, brainstorm with you, or just keeping it more open and actually listening, I think really disarms people a lot, and actually disarms their own imposter syndrome as well. Do you want to add something?
No, I was just going to say that what my approach is to learn something from the other person, but never to say like, I don't know what I'm doing. Because I at least know one little thing, but I don't want to be I find that if I do that, I allow myself to like put myself down. Like it's much easier for me to stand up for somebody else than it is for me to stand up to me. So when I talk to myself like that, it's much harder for me to stand up again. So my approach is usually to learn something from the person and say like, oh, could you teach me a little bit more about this? Or like what you said works the best for me.
Do you have time for one more, you think? We do one more.
1 minute.
Okay.
One more question.
No pressure. We can also wrap it up. We don't have to. But thank you. Oh, do you want to?
I was just going to say, I don't have a question, but I was just going to say, like, a lot of what I'm hearing in the group is kind of like a lot of power struggle, a lot of power dynamics, and kind of what you two were saying about, like, disarm the other person by engaging through questioning and by handing over that almost like a power stick, right? Like you're handing it to them, like, hey, here you go, now you tell me. Suddenly the other person isn't threatened and can work rather than having that dynamic continue. Suddenly there's an even playing field.
And by the way, like this was something, it took me a while to learn this. I remember when I was at McKinsey, my first job, I wanted to talk all the time because I like felt like I needed to prove that I like knew stuff. And I was like, trust me, I know things. I found that when I had client meetings, the meetings that felt like they went the best, the clients that said they had like a great meeting with me, I just let them talk the whole time. Like they just talk the whole time. And still like my best interviews, like, and I get the job, like they just talk the whole time. Like I just like, and so I just would say like, I think that's a really great strategy in general is like let other people talk because we're really bad at doing that. And you're not losing the power, you're actually gaining the power. In a lot of ways you're perceived as much more senior if you're not jumping in all the time and you're like, you're leading the conversation, you're asking the questions and you're more quiet. Sometimes it's actually much more about the presence that you have and the way you can kind of corral the conversation than it is about what you specifically share. That's like such a micro example and it doesn't work for everyone, but that's something I really believe in as well, is like letting other people talk. Well, thank you all for having me. This was awesome. Thank you.